Jai Hind and a very good morning, dear students. How are you all? I hope you all must be fine and doing great at your home. Today in our series of our online class, we are going to discuss the very first chapter of your English main book Flamingo, the last lesson. Yes, you heard it correct. We are going to discuss the very first chapter, the last lesson. Yes, the last lesson, written by Alfonso Dodi. It is a very, very beautiful story written in a very, very organized way by Alfonso Dodi, which carries the themes. The themes which are prevalent in the last lesson by Alfonso Dodi are love for one's mother tongue, freedom of language, and patriotism. The last lesson revolves around the language and its importance to the citizens of our country. It is the duty of every citizen to safeguard the language of the country as it is the identity of that country. The lesson depicts how after defeating France in the war, the Prussians wanted to rule over not only the territory of France but also over the minds and hearts of the people. The story reinforces the fact that we value something more when it is lost. The pain and anguish of the students and the teacher is evident as everyone realizes how things were taken for granted. The lesson emphasizes the importance of the mother tongue for everyone and the need to realize the fact that it is our language which gives us our identity, respect, and freedom. So now let's move to the explanation of the chapter. Before we move further, let us quickly talk about the author Alfonso Dodi. Alfonso Dodi is considered to be one of its most iconic names of French literature. Unlike many famous writers in world history, Alfonso wasn't very well educated. He wrote his first novel at the age of 14. His works drew inspiration from instances of his life. His work, Trente and de Paris and Souvenirs d'un homme de lettres, seem to be more like autobiographies. Passed away in the final decade, his name is very popular amongst the citizens of France. A lot of educational institutions in France have been named after this famous writer. Alfonso is one of the handful writers who portray human emotions in a very realistic manner. So, this was all about Alfonso Dodi, the writer of the chapter. So before moving further, let us quickly discuss about the main characters of the story. The very first character of the story is Franz. Franz is the young French student at a school in Alsace-Lorraine. Franz, who is the story's first-person narrator. The dramatic tension of the story seems as though it is going to be the result of friction with his teacher because the tale begins with Franz anxious preparing for school, knowing he is unprepared for his teacher's grammar lesson on participles. After getting to school, the tension turns out to be far worse than a dangling participle. The very next character of the story is Mr. Hamel. Mr. Hamel is Franz's teacher and schoolmaster, the man whose intent to lure France into the mysterious world of French participles, has seized the young man with dread. But when he gets to school, Franz quickly learns that he is not having studied or being prepared for the questions his teacher have overnight become the problems of another world. The war with the Prussians has just resulted in the annexation of Alsace-Lorraine into Prussian control. It turns out that today is not just Mr. Hammel's last day on the job, it is also his last day in the region, having been ordered to leave what is now Prussian territory. Even more distressing, it is the last day that France will be required to learn French. There are another few minor characters in the story, like Mr. Hauser. Hauser is an older gentleman France recognizes from the village, and the Prussian soldiers. Now, let us start with the setting of our story. The story Last Lesson is set in the days of Franco-Prussian War. You can see here on the screen, France was defeated by Prussia and districts of Alsace and Lorraine had passed into Prussian hands. The orders came from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The story tells the effect of transition on the people through the eyes of a young boy, Franz. The prose, The Last Lesson, written by Alphonse Daudet, describes the year 1870. If you can see here on the screen, it is there, when the Prussian forces under Bismarck attacked and captured France. The French districts of Alsace and Lorraine went into Prussian hands. The new Prussian rules discontinued the teaching of French in the schools of these two districts. The French teachers were asked to leave. The story describes the last day of one such French class under M. Hamel. M. Hamel could no longer remain in his old school. He gave his last lesson with utmost devotion. You can see here on the screen, it's written German would be taught in schools of Alsace and Lorraine, because these were the states which were there in the France, but because Prussia has won all the states of France, so there has been orders from the Berlin that now German would be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. And our hero, Mr. Hamel, he was the French teacher, and that is why he was delivering his last lesson on French on that day. Okay, let us move to the another slide. If you can see here on the screen, our hero Franz, a small schoolboy, he was late for school that morning. The story, The Last Lesson, describes what is just another ordinary day for Franz, who started very late for school that morning. In fact, he was reluctant to go to school as he had not prepared his French lessons on participles, and his teacher, M. Hamel, was going to conduct an oral test on the topic in the class. Initially, he thought of spending the bright, warm day outdoors, enjoying the chirping of birds and drilling of Prussian soldiers at the back of the sawmill. But finally, he decided to go to the Okay, so he decided to spend time outdoors on that warm day, but he resisted all this and hurried off to the school. On the way, Franz passed the town hall, where he saw a large crowd reading the bulletin board, which had been a source of all bad news. Bulletin board means bad news for them. Okay? Franz didn't stop there and rushed to the school. So you can see here on the screen what he observed. He observed that there is a huge crowd outside the town hall, and people, they are reading something from the bulletin board, and bulletin board always gives the very bad news. But anyhow, he didn't stop and he moved to the rushed to the school. When Franz arrived at the school, he saw the scene at the school was very unusual. Okay, so he found a strange quietness there. He found that his classmates were already seated in their places, and the teacher had already started teaching. Otherwise, it would not be like this in normal days. The school doesn't remain to be as quiet as it is today. There was a huge hustle bustle, lot of sound and noise in the school other days, but today there was something different. The back benches were occupied by the village elders, who were grim and solemn. To his surprise, Hamel was in the formal dress that he wears only on the inspection or on prize distribution days. Friends found Hamel to be kinder than usual. You can see here on the screen, class seated and Mr. Hamel moving around. Okay, he's having a ruler under his arm. Normal other days, but today it is not like that. Okay. Mr. Hamel, he's sitting today in his best attire. I told you he was wearing a very beautiful green colored coat and a frilled shirt. Okay, and his hat. He was like dressed very nicely on that day. Village men were seated on the last benches. Franz found Hamel to be kinder than usual. He didn't scold Franz for being late and allowed him to take his seat. Franz was shocked to get the news that he is going to be scolded, and the new German teacher would take charge on the following day. He was also surprised to hear that it is Mr. Hammer's last lesson in French. Okay, so he saw through the window that the class was all settled down. He was frightened at the thought of entering the class in front of everyone, but his teacher was calm and kindly asked him to get to his seat so that they could begin. When he settled down, he noticed that their teacher was dressed in his best attire, which he would wear for inspection and prize distribution functions. He also noticed that the village men were seated on the last benches of the room. All of them looked sad. Mr. Hamel mounted his chair and in the same grave and gentle tone said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you." The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive. Now it all became clear. Now it all became clear to Franz. The crowd at the town hall notice board, the silence in the school, the kindness of his teacher, and his unusual attire, and the presence of village men in the classroom. Franz was shocked that it was his last lesson in French, his mother tongue. He could barely write it. He was remorseful for not learning well in the past. All the things he ran away from seemed so precious. The idea that his teacher was going away made him forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. When it was his turn to recite the lesson, Franz wanted to be able to recite it loud and clear at once, but got mixed up at the first words and hung his head in shame. His teacher did not scold him. Very unusual this time, as he told Franz that today he would himself be ashamed of himself. He said sarcastically that the entire Alsace had this bad habit of putting off their work to the next day, and now they would regret it when the enemy will laugh at them for not knowing their own language. He said that not only Franz but all of them, his parents, teachers, were to be blamed for not being serious towards learning French. He praised French. He praised French for being the most beautiful language, being the clearest and logical. He read out a grammar lesson to them, and Franz was amazed at how well he understood it. Franz realized that he had never listened to him so attentively, and that his teacher had also not taught them so patiently. The grammar lesson was followed by one in writing. They got new notebooks to write on. On that last day, they got new notebooks to write on. They had beautifully written on them the words France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They seemed like little flags put up on their desks. There was a sense of patriotism in the class. Everyone started work and the classroom was unusually quiet. The only sound that was heard was of pen being scribbled on the paper. A few insects flew into the class, but nobody's attention got diverted. No one of them made a noise. The pigeons could be heard. You can see here. The pigeons could be heard on the roof of the school, and Franz wondered and Franz wondered whether they would also be forced to coo in German language. He had spent 40 years in the school. Who? Mr. Hamel. He has spent 40 years in the school with a garden outside and his students in the classroom. The only change was that the classroom benches had worn out due to use over the years. The walnut trees had grown taller, and the vine that he had planted had twined up the window across the roof. It would be heartbreaking for him to leave all this and go. His sister could be heard upstairs packing their bags to leave the country the next day. You can see here on the picture Mr. Hauser, an old village man, was reading. He is showing his tribute towards M. Hamel for doing his duty from last 40 years. He is reading, his voice trembling with emotions because it was the last day of Mr. Hamel, as he told that from now onwards French will not be taught in Alsace and Lorraine. The church clock struck 12. The Prussians returning from drill sounded. The teacher started to speak but could not, and then he turned to the blackboard and wrote the words Vive la France. Vive la France means long live France. Then, because he was overwhelmed with emotions, he could not speak. He gave a gesture that school was over and that all the villagers, they may go. This was all about the explanation of our chapter, the last lesson. Now let us quickly have a gist of the lesson. Franz is afraid of going to school as he has not learnt participles. Franz, a young schoolboy, he wants to enjoy beauty of nature, the bright sunshine, the birds chirping in the woods, Prussian soldiers drilling, but he resisted because he was getting late to the school. Bulletin board. What is the significance of the bulletin board? All bad news, lost battles, the drafts and orders of the commanding officers, wondered what it could be now. After that, Franz notices some changes in the school. Instead of noisy classrooms, everything was as quiet as Sunday morning. The teacher does not scold him and told him very kindly to go to his seat. The teacher dressed in his Sunday's best, in his best attire. On that day, villagers had also come to the school and they were occupying the last benches. They came to pay tribute to M. Hamel for his 40 years of sincere service and also to express their solidarity with France. Mr. Hamel, making the announcement that it would be the last French lesson, realizes that what was put up on the bulletin board. Franz realizes that he does not know his own mother tongue. He regretted why he had not taken his lessons seriously. He also realizes the reason why teacher was dressed in his Sunday best and villagers sitting at the back. Hamel realizes that all three, the children, the parents, and he himself, are to be blamed for losing respect and regarding for the mother tongue. for losing respect and regard for the mother tongue. Always keep the mother tongue close to your heart as it is the key to the prison of slavery. This was told by M. Hamel to the people of Alsace and Lorraine. Atmosphere in the class: teacher teaching sincerely and patiently, students and others studying with utmost sincerity on the last day. Franz wonders sarcastically if Prussians could force pigeons to coo in German. Hamel, overcome with emotions, could not speak a single word and wrote on the blackboard, "Vive la France," means "Long live France." So here is the mind map of the last lesson for all of you. I have taken it from some other website. You can also search for it, browse the last lesson. Okay, so yes, last lesson, the main character of last lesson is Franz. You can see here on the screen. So what's happening in the chapter? It would be easier for you if you can see here in the form of the points. Franz feared while going to the school. Why he was having a fear? Because he was late for school, number one. Second one, he was afraid of scolding. Why he was afraid of scolding? Because he had not learned lesson on English participles. Okay. Then he made a plan. So what was his plan? He thought of running away and spending the day outside because the day was bright and warm. He thought, let me skip the school today, bunk the school today and enjoy the outdoor scene. Okay, he thought to enjoy birds chirping. He was tempted to watch drilling of Prussian soldiers. But what happened? He overcome all his temptation and rushed to school. So the last lesson, what comes first? Franz. What was happening to Franz? He was afraid. He was afraid because he was late. He has not learned his lesson on participles. And then he made a plan to skip, how to skip from that scolding. Okay. Now let us move. While moving towards the school, he saw something in front of the town hall. Okay, so what was the scene at the town hall? He saw bulletin board, and bulletin board in the chapter was mentioned by the narrator is a bad source of news always. Okay, so he saw a crowd in front of the bulletin board and he thought that there must be a bad news. That's why this crowd is here. Now let us move to the next slide. Yes. Then he reached school. Okay. He reached school. What he observed? He observed there the scene in the school was unusual on that day. Otherwise, what is the usual scene at the school other days? See, you can see here. In school always remains hustle and bustle. Notes of opening and closing desk. Okay, it was wooden desk, and if you would have known that there were kind of a desk in the school which can be opened easily and then it could, like, you can put it back also. So repetition of lesson in unison and striking of teacher's rule against the table. The teacher used to beat his ruler, and this sort of overall means there was a noise in the school the other days, but today he noticed everything was silent. M. Hamel was in occasional dress. Classmates were already in their places. Surprising things in the classroom. What are those surprising things? Kindness of M. Hamel, because today Mr. Hamel He didn't scold him for coming late. In fact, very kindly he said that get in. We are getting late, we shall start. Okay? Serious look of the school. For the very first time, Franz observed a kind of a seriousness in the school. Village elderly people sitting on the back benches. So this is the third important point. First, when we talk about the last lesson, the very first thing which comes to our mind is Franz, then the scene at the town hall, and then he reached school, and then what he observed in the school. It's mentioned here. Now let us move to the next slide. Next slide talks about Mr. M. Hamill. So M. Hamill, again our protagonist in the story. Now let us see what do we have about M. Hamill. Okay. So M. Hamill addressing to the student. M. Hamill demands full attention. Whenever M. Hamill used to teach, he demanded full attention. Today it was his last lesson of French. German will be taught in the school of Alsace and Lorraine. This is what he told the people of the France. Franz felt sorry for ignoring his lesson, deeply pained at the thought of M. Hamill going away. So he actually, Franz, he started building, he started liking M. Hamill. When he heard that it is the last day of Mr. M. Hamill, he developed a kind of a liking towards Mr. Hamill. So that's why he was deeply pained at the thought of M. Hamill going away. Now let's see. Then M. Hamill presented his view about lack of learning and what he said. Let me show you. Yes. He said that parents were ignorant. They were not anxious to have their children learn. Then he also said children prefer to be put to work on farms or mills rather than sending to the school. He also blamed himself for sending children on errands. Errands means for small, journeys or for doing some small work. Calls the French language the most beautiful language. So today M. Hamill teaches his last lesson, and when he was teaching his last lesson, what he said, he calls the French language the most beautiful language. You can see here. He gives the villagers their lesson in grammar. He wanted to teach them everything in one go. After that, he gives a lesson in writing also. Then what do we get to know about M. Hamill? It is M. Hamill's dedication. How we get to know that he was dedicated? Because he served school for 40 years. Nothing had changed since he joined, and today he was leaving. Desks and benches had worn smooth. Walnut trees grow taller. Hop vine reached to the roof. He planted them. When he came to the France and Alsace and Lorraine, he planted them, and today these trees have grown taller and the hop vine reached to the roof. Next, we come to know about M. Hamill's courage. How do we come to know about M. Hamill's courage? He delivers his last lesson in history. Means he knew that it was his last day. He could have spoken, he could have given some, lectures or something, but he delivers his last lesson, which shows his courage. Tears rolled down from the eyes of listeners. Everyone gets emotional. Okay. Next, we get to know from the chapter about M. Hamill's spirit of patriotism. How? See, church clock strikes 12. Trumpets of the Prussian soldiers sound under the window. M. Hamill writes, "Vive la France," to dismiss the last class. He dismissed school by making a gesture with his hand. Okay, so this is all about we get to know about M. Hamel. Now let's move to our next slide. Villagers. Next comes to the chapter are the villagers. A tribute to teacher by the villagers gathered in the classroom. They all gathered to pay tribute to M. Hamel for his service of 40 years. And what they have been showing, what they are showing over there, see, repentance for not having attended in the school. They had a sense of a regret inside them that they didn't attend the school. They came to thank the master for 40 years of his service. They came as a mark of respect for the country. Okay? Then, how was the scene with the students? See, students' attention. Students, they were paying attention on that day. They set to work very quickly. There was pin drop silence in the classroom. Even beetles failed to distract them. Okay, they were so highly attentive on that day. So, in the last, we get to know that M. Hamel's spirit of patriotism. He wrote, "Vive les France, dismiss the last class." That means long live France. I hope this mind map must be clear to all of you. Now, let us quickly move. What is the moral of the story? The last lesson. The moral of the story, or the message the story gives to all of us, is that we should not postpone our work for tomorrow, obvious to the fact that life is subject to change, as what has happened to the people of XII. The author tries to convey that people generally understand the value of someone or something in their life very often after it is lost to them. As for instance, Franz didn't take his studies seriously. He didn't learn his lessons properly. Later he realized that if he would have studied nicely, then he would have known his language. Now he had only one chance to get to learn his language, and that too for the last time. Similarly, our wake-up calls of life should not come so late. We must know the importance of every hour. Now, I hope the chapter explanation must be clear to you. It is a very, very small story and very interesting story with a deep message inside it. Okay, having only three main characters. That is, one is Franz, second one is M. Hamel, and third one is our old villager. Right? Very sweet short story. I hope it must be clear to all of you. Chapters, question, answer, summary, everything I'll send you in the form of PDF, which you need to do in your notebook. I'll see you very soon in your next session. Till then, take very good care of yourself. Keep practicing at home. Stay safe. Have a good day.